Hi, welcome back to Adventure Capital. On today's episode, Johnny interviews Krishan Arora, the founder and CEO of the Aurora Project, a digital marketing agency that, among other things, helps companies raise capital through equity crowdfunding. Over the last few years, Krishan and his team have helped raise over $50 million in capital for their clients. In this interview, he discusses some marketing best practices and gives some great advice on how founders can maximize their success on a Wefunder crowdfunding campaign. Listen in to Johnny and Krishan.
So Krishan, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be on, Johnny. Thanks.
Let's get started. Maybe you could give us a high-level overview. What is the Aurora Project?
Great. The Aurora Project, Johnny, is a hybrid entity. Part of us is a product launchpad incubator, and the other part is a digital growth marketing agency that specializes in crowdfunding campaigns.
Awesome. So let's pause on the product launchpad incubator for a start. What does that mean?
Great. So as we come across multiple startups all around the world, we first define how we can add value to them when they come to our ecosystem, right? So we sort of incubate the idea where we say, great, you are a early stage idea, pre-revenue, pre-market, pre-MVP. What would be the ideal path that we would take you to market? Is it through digital marketing? Is it through sort of a B2B funnel that we create for you? Is it through crowdfunding, which has been our most successful go-to-market avenue? So first we position the company for success, whether it be through a digital marketing funnel targeting consumers, businesses, or to the crowdfunding space, and then we isolate what is the correct strategy to move forward, and then execute the plan from there. So a much more hands-on sort of early-stage incubator versus just giving strategic advice. Not only do we come up with the plan of action, but we have the execution ring associated with it as well.
Got it. And yeah, then on the digital marketing agency side, so you're focused on crowdfunding, and now in the partnership that we have together, which has been great, you're kind of coming to focus even within crowdfunding on equity crowdfunding. Is that right?
Correct. And this is something that I have been really keeping my eyes on ever since the Jobs Act, the Title III reform, was passed from May 2016 to January 2017, that specific window. I have raised institutional funds and angel investor funds for previous startups I was a part for, Johnny, and it was difficult, to say the least, and I always thought there has to be a better way.
What was difficult about it?
Just continuously pitching investors, getting told no, getting told that you aren't good enough or the idea is not good enough, and having to just sort of put your chin up and keep going, and eventually finding a group of investors that end up becoming the lead, and then everybody else sort of follows from there. So just the monotonous process of dealing with early stage angel investors or VCs, I just thought was, the incentives were sort of disaligned for me from the get-go.
In what way?
Well, to me, I always thought that, they wanted more equity than what it was worth. So devalue the company, get more equity up front. And if your incentives are truly aligned, you should be adding a lot more value from a long-term perspective than a short-term perspective. And also in a lot of these early stage meetings with VCs that I would speak to, it was their job to just come up with ideas and reasons why your idea wouldn't work, which I understand from a due diligence standpoint, the purpose that serves. But all of my friends in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I went to school and that were raising money, sort of went through the same thing. It was months and months of pitching with traction, with a good idea, and constantly sort of being said, no, not now, maybe come back to us later when you have more traction. And really the incentive misalignment that I saw was the answer that I kept getting was, once you have traction, or, let's just call it this arbitrary stage in a life cycle of a company called you have traction now, come back and we'll give you funding. Well, at that point, you don't necessarily need that in-source of capital if you're actually growing and can get more creative to get that capital. I needed it 6 months ago to build a better team and to build a better product, not now when it's working. So that's what I always found very funky.
I was speaking with a founder this morning that was saying exactly the same thing. Yeah. Where were you raising, just out of interest, geographically? You're based in Miami now?
Yeah.
In Boston. Okay. So that's even in a place with, a pretty well-developed network of angel investors and investors where there's more of a circuit. I imagine like doing the rounds on the angel circuit in a market that has less going on in the way of startups and investors in Boston, that process will be even harder.
Exactly.
And obviously now in COVID time, it's even harder still.
And that's exactly why I think we are focusing, exactly why I believe we're focusing so much more on equity crowdfunding, because the power that it gives is back to the users and the advocates around the company. It really allows a democratization and a decentralization of fundraising, which, obviously on the later stages of fundraising, B rounds and C rounds, institutional investments and VCs are very much needed for the larger checks. But for the early stage companies, when you're talking about a Reg CF campaign or a Reg A campaign, I think equity crowdfunding will soon, in the next many years, rival that of VCs and angels to a very large degree.
Well, Krishan, welcome to the Wefunder business development team. It's great. It's great. So this is a kind of a maybe provocative, like maybe philosophical question for you. So you're talking there about, it's very, very hard for a startup to do the rounds and hear no after no. You're getting a ton of reasons from institutional angel investors why this idea won't work, and crowdfunding is making it easier. I guess, do you think it's making it too easy? Like, is there a risk that, on the other hand, then you can get into situations where it's almost too easy for founders, and especially founders that have a smooth sales pitch, to raise capital, and there isn't enough due diligence happening? What would you say to a skeptic on that side of the equation?
Not at all. In fact, I think it requires as much work as crowdfunding requires as much work as any other form of fundraising, but the value of crowdfunding is not only in the access to capital, but also the brand advocates, the brand ambassadors, and the product, power users that you acquire through the crowdfunding campaign itself is sort of a huge value. And for those that say that it's easy or it's, almost frivolous to some degree, have never run a successful crowdfunding campaign before. We're coming up on over $50 million raised through our crowdfunding campaigns. And we realize that you, as the founding team, have to spend several hours a day consistently for weeks on end fielding investor questions and adapting your campaign page and continuously reaching out to press and keeping your current community engaged, reaching out to friends and family and educating them. And the more creative you are as a founder, the more funds you'll raise. And a prime example of that was one of our past campaigns that we were advising on and managing was the Caribou campaign on Wefunder. We ended up raising, Max, who's the CEO, is a rock star, and you can just ask her on how
she hustled hard.
Easy it was.
She hustled very hard. I would be up at midnight sending emails here in San Francisco, and Max immediately responds, and it's like, wait, isn't it 3 a.m. for you?
Yeah.
And
that's exactly right.
she was hustling very hard. I think she hustles hard generally. I don't think that was entirely the Wefunder campaign, but and it paid off big. I think she raised $1.5 million. I believe she's now, onto her next round. That business is doing extremely well in this time of COVID. I'm not sure if you ever use that product, but I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. Normally she is allergic to the phone. She runs away from the phone when my mom is calling from England. But with Caribou, my daughter is like, I want to call up grandma and have her read a book to me through Caribou. It's honestly just an absolutely incredible product. The fact that she can get my daughter to stay on the phone for 10 minutes is like a miracle. Okay, but that's a great answer. And I think it's great to set clear expectations. It's not like push button, raise $1 million. Sometimes it does work like that. Lost Spirits raised $1.5 million with us in March 2020. I mean, that's a tough time to raise capital. They raised $1.5 million in a week, basically based on one email they sent to their investor base. But generally speaking, especially if you don't have a massive audience of customers that love you like they did, it's going to take work. It's going to be a bit of a grind. And so, it just as raising from conventional investors, this is also hard work. So question for you, kind of a dumb question, but for someone that hasn't used a digital marketing agency before, and especially someone that's looking at running an equity crowdfunding campaign, they're looking at engaging a digital marketing agency, what does a digital marketing agency do? Great question. So, because we've run hundreds of crowdfunding campaigns and raised tens of millions of dollars in the space, we truly understand the full life cycle
of a crowdfunding campaign. And one of the things that founders need to be aware of is if you're asking the question, what am I going to do now at any point in time during the campaign, the preparation phase wasn't executed as strategically as you should have done it. So that's what we sort of, in a nutshell, try to avoid. So in terms of immediate deliverables, Johnny, we turn around not only, the analogy that I use is a cake. So the first layer is sort of the frosting that's on top of the cake. That's the messaging, the page, the pitch deck, making sure it's brief, succinct. Cold investors online who have never heard of your brand or never heard of you as founders or your company or your product should be able to understand in a succinct digital campaign page what you're doing, what the value proposition is, and the video and the pitch deck and the financials should say a compelling story, because at the end of the day, you're not raising this money face to face. Most of these investors who've never heard of you and never seen your product are going to interact with you as a first interaction on your Wefunder campaign page. So that has to be done strategically and methodically. And on the back end, we look at a lot of data through Google Analytics and Facebook Pixel on what the conversion rates are and where the traffic is going, which is one of the things that we really sort of focus on. So that's sort of the top layer of the cake. The middle layer of the cake is setting up a internal community activation strategy well in advance of the campaign. So if you're a founder, like one of the campaigns that we're very proud of running, which is the Everyday campaign, activating existing users, friends and family around your network, alumni networks, community groups, meetup groups, Facebook groups, really creating a list of multi-tiered marketing channels that we can drive traffic to a campaign for the first week or two of the campaign, because early momentum is so important in any crowdfunding campaign. Then the bottom layer, which is sort of the foundation of it, is our own audiences. We have tens of thousands of crowdfunding investors on our own Facebook pixels and email lists, and a network of high converting affiliate networks that have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of equity crowdfunding investors on their platform. So that is just sort of the foundation of what we do, strategically creating a day-to-day, week-by-week, multi-tiered marketing campaign for the lifespan of the entire campaign is what we come in and help do. And then on top of that, advise on investor updates, help, give strategic ideas on Skype interviews and Skype Q&As you can have to keep your community engaged, and help with email templates, Facebook ads. I mean the whole 9 yards that goes into raising a large seven-figure crowdfunding campaign.
Got it. And so for an average, or maybe not an average campaign, but like let's say Maxime from Caribou, she raised I think $1.5 million on Wefunder, working closely with you. Like, how much time do you spend with her? Is it like 2 hours kind of in meetings at the outset, and then check in for a couple of hours every couple of weeks, or are you super in the weeds, working together? What is the kind of engagement look like?
This varies company to company that we work with, because different companies, Johnny, come to us at different stages of their life cycle, right? So some companies come to us with tens of thousands of existing users of their platform or service, a very engaged social media following, and a lot of the branding kind of already figured out, where we're like, great, we're going to do what we do, focus on the Facebook ads, and really get into the weeds of converting audiences. Other companies come to us and need a little bit of refinement on defining their value proposition to a larger audience in the online world, to really hone in their messaging, and they also need help with activating their internal community members. So depending on how active the founding team is, depending on how big of a community the founding team actually has around them, whether it be through friends and family or investors or users or whatever it may be, and how much time the team has to devote. Because a lot of what we have can be teachable, where we just sort of share our strategies with our founders to keep the cost of working with us low. And as long as they're executing, like Maxime did, 20 hours a day, every single day for several months on end, we can be sort of relatively high-level strategy. And for teams that need much more hands-on focus, we can come in and sort of do a lot of the work required to make a campaign successful. So it varies depending on the company, what stage they're in, and what resources they have.
Got it. If you were advising a founder, or I guess for founders that are considering running an equity crowdfunding campaign, what are kind of, let's say, 3 examples of marketing strategies or tactics which you have found to be especially effective, and especially maybe ones that founders that you're working with might, without working with you guys, they might not have thought to execute on those?
Great. I'll start with one of the biggest ones, equity crowdfunding investment is not a linear conversion because as an investor, you have to give your social security number to validate the transaction, your bank account information, your first name, last name, address. A lot of these conversions are not one click. These investors are not looking at ads or emails or promotional materials from trusted sources and are going to your page and immediately converting. A small portion of them are, but a large portion of them require a very structured retargeting campaign in place. And this is one of the things that we love about Wefunder the most, the implementation of the Facebook pixel and the Google Analytics pixel as well, which allows us to measure all of these things. So having the homepage retargeting campaign with a multitude of content messaging A/B tests going on is of utmost importance, right? So for the everyday campaign that is thriving on Wefunder, our digital ads were converting at 350+% return on ad spend, and sometimes much, much higher given the days that we were performing the ads. So all that really goes to show that if you have a strong digital retargeting funnel in place, you're going to acquire a lot more funding, which allows your campaign to be a lot more successful in the long run. Can you be even surprised? Friends and family aren't even converting on the first click, because if you put yourself in the shoe of an everyday user that might be investing on a Wefunder campaign, they might be on a call for work or going to the gym or, doing something that they can't just sit down, focus. They're buying equity. It's not like buying a pair of shoes where it's like a one-button click, right? So we're more of a deeper process. So the retargeting campaign is, in our opinion, one of the fundamental pillars.
Retargeting, are you talking there about Facebook ads, or what are the kind of various tactics that you employ when it comes to retargeting?
Great. Facebook ads primarily, because that does encompass Instagram as well. And during the COVID outbreak, online engagement is skyrocketing right now, specifically on Facebook and Instagram and digital mediums in general. So start there. You can leverage that into Google retargeting ads, email retargeting campaigns based on how you set your funnel up. And you can retarget your website visitors to participate in a webinar, and then retarget the webinar visitors with a different message. It really depends how complicated you want to get. And our funnels get fairly multi-layered and complicated. But in essence, yes, a Facebook and Instagram retargeting campaign backed with the Google Analytics pixel on the campaign page allows you to really get a much deeper insight into what's happening and allows you to capture a lot more of the audience that is not ready to convert on the first click. That's sort of bullet point number one.
Yeah, that's retargeting. What's bullet point number two? This is awesome.
Bullet point number two is keeping your community engaged. A lot of these investors are going to have Q&As that they need to be fleshed out to feel comfortable investing, whether if it's participating on your campaign page on Wefunder and interacting with your investors through Q&A before they invest, or holding a Facebook Live session and having your potential investment community come on Facebook Live. Give them a place where they can come and ask their questions and get real-time feedback. Because once again, take dumb this down to the human level. You're asking relatively random people online that you've never met to give you money for equity in your company in exchange, and they have to believe that they're going to get a return for it in the future, right? So how do you make that journey as frictionless, as comfortable as possible? Right?
That's such a great point, and I think we do a pretty good job on putting together the campaign page on Wefunder, and obviously you guys with the companies you're supporting, you're doing a great job there as well. People can read the pitch deck. But for me, if there's a video of a smart founder like Max or Christine talking into a camera, and answering questions and just showing her command of the space and her, compelling vision for the company and her command of the KPIs, that's any investor, especially if they're running a larger check, is going to be so much more willing to commit to that. Because they've, seen the founder talking for a while. So that's a great point. Another one on kind of engaging the community, I've been kind of encouraging founders to do recently is especially for the larger investors, $1,000, $2,000 and up investors on the campaign, reach out to them, try to get on the phone with them, right? Especially if you don't know these guys, get on the phone with them, thank them for investing, and ask if they have feedback on how you could improve the campaign. They are now 100%. Financially incentivized for your company to do well. The thing that your company is focused on right now is raising money. So they are financially incentivized to help you run a successful campaign over the coming weeks. So get their input on, Is there kind of a way that we could tweak the communication here? Do you have good ideas about other kind of marketing strategies? Do you have other investors that you know who are interested in investing in similar companies that you can make an email intro to? So that's another way, I think, where you can take the guys that are already investing, the community, and engage them. So that's the second bullet. What about the third and final bullet?
The third and final bullet on our end, I mean, it depends on how you want to run your campaign, but in our experience, when we speak with founders, this is the mathematical example that I use. And this is sort of high-level strategy of how to run a campaign to make sure that it reaches its potential. Hypothetically speaking, for mathematical purposes, let's say a campaign is going to be 10 days long, which we know it can't be, but just bear with me for the mathematical example. If the campaign was going to be 10 days long, most people would come in and say, okay, I'm going to invest 10% of my overall marketing efforts every single day in the campaign so that on day 10, I have exhausted all 100% of the marketing efforts that I have, right? Mm-hmm. That is fundamentally not how you do it. You want to front load your campaign. What we recommend founders do is invest 70% of marketing effort in the first 3 days of the campaign and tier out the last 30% over the next 7 days. Because if you front load your campaign and hit a six-figure number in the first couple of weeks of being live, the platform community receives it better because you see the traction week over week, just like within traditional investing. It's hard to find a lead, but once you find a lead, the money sort of starts coming in, right?
This is such an interesting point. And so kind of talk through this, because on the other hand, how we tend to do ad spends, we kind of spend on Facebook ads, Instagram ads for our founders as part of the fee that they pay us at 2 points of the campaign. First, we have a rule that when they pass $100,000, we start spending money on Facebook ads on their behalf. And then secondly, we have it at the close of the campaign. And the reason we have it at the close of the campaign is that we've seen a significant increase in return on ad spend on Facebook ads in the last days of the campaign. I think it's two reasons. One is there's a looming deadline, right? So the countdown clock on the Wefunder page means that increases propensity to invest. And then the second point is, by that point, there are more investors in the campaign. There's more dollars in the campaign. So there's more social proof and so a high conversion rate. So how do you strike the balance between, I totally hear where you're coming from, which is front load the spend to get momentum coming out the gate. Then you get higher up the Wefunder algorithm. There's a virtuous cycle that sets in. But then on the other hand, you probably are going to see a higher ROAS towards the back end of the campaign. So 100%. How do you think about that?
Great question. So going back to the original inquiry that you gave to me, what do? We have multiple strategies that we implement. What we do as an entity helping campaigners raise funds is different what we'd recommend somebody to do them by themselves, because we have the skill sets to literally fluctuate the ad spend daily based on the return on ad spend that we're getting. So our curves aren't necessarily, like a U shape where it's beginning very strong, plateaus in the middle, and strong at the end. We're sort of like a constant wave throughout the campaign in terms of our ability to fluctuate. So on our end, we see the same thing. The first week's going to be big, the last week's going to be big, and keep the weeks in the middle pretty strong. But for campaigners doing this by themselves and they don't have the ability to work with an agency for whatever reason, and they just want to know, like, how do I get the most bang for my buck? We would still recommend front-loading the campaign, because if you don't do that, the end of the campaign isn't going to be appealing ever. You're not going to get to that point.
That's a fair point. That's always the trade-off that we're trying to think through as well. Is you will see a higher ROAS at the end, but you need the juice at the start to have built the momentum. So it is it's a tough balance to strike. Right. What do you think? You've done equity crowdfunding campaigns. You've done perks-based crowdfunding campaigns. What do you see as maybe some of the biggest differences between the two crowdfunding approaches?
It's crazy, because I was just speaking to Chris Lustrino from King's Crowd just right before this podcast on this exact topic. We ran a campaign many years ago called Geo Orbital, GEO Orbital, and we raised for them $1.2 million on a Kickstarter campaign. I mean, the digital architects behind the whole thing of the crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter. A post-Kickstarter campaign, there was a Start Engine campaign that was ran, and they leveraged their Kickstarter backers and some existing investors and capped out a Reg CS campaign at the $1,070,000 based on the community primarily that we had built on the Kickstarter campaign for them, right? So there is a very serious overlap, and we've seen that case study happen multiple times across multiple campaigns where on the rewards-based investors and backers, there is a significant overlap between their interest once they have participated in a rewards-based crowdfunding campaign. They get the product. They're bought in. This is an awesome product. Now you reach back out to them. You're like, now you can actually buy equity in the company. And by the way,
100%.
we've grown 3x in valuation since you first invested in the Kickstarter campaign. There's a very, very deep overlap between those two audiences.
Do you know the Oculus story?
Of course.
Have you heard this one? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. It's like they raised all this money on, I guess it was Kickstarter perks.
Correct.
And then they get bought by Facebook, soon after that. And it's like, wow, if those backers of the Kickstarter project had gotten a chance to get a piece of equity, oh my goodness, that would have created a lot of, I think a lot about the founder side, and you talked initially at the start of this call about the founder side of the kind of the mission of Wefunder, right? Which is democratizing investing so that more founders can have an easier time raising capital they need to give it a shot, give their company a shot. I also get excited about the investor side. It's like that could have made a lot of like middle class Americans quite rich if instead of VCs and kind of millionaires and accredited investors benefiting from that exit, then if that had been their customers and fans that have benefited. But anyway, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so that's a great example of how Duo Orbital, they did a perks-based crowdfunding campaign, they beat an audience, they built an audience, then they were able to kind of leverage that into a Reg CF campaign. But do you what are the differences? Like, are there big differences in how you should run a perks versus an equity crowdfunding campaign, or are they actually pretty similar?
There's two things you have to segment in that question. That's a 2-dimensional question, and I'm going to give you a 3-dimensional answer there. On the strategy level, intangible strategy as the campaigner, there's a lot of overlap. The content messaging has to be precise and brief. You have to have a prerequisite of an early adopter community that is going to adopt the campaign based on early bird specials, based on some type of incentive for
There's
week
a lot
one
of
adoption.
Preparation before launch.
Exactly. So all that stays the same. And then during the live campaign, engaging with your community, keeping them updated with what's happening, and getting the Q&As figured out within real time if possible, or a couple of hours. That takes a similar approach. And then post-campaign, continuously updating your investors and backers on what's happening with the company, turning them into brand advocates from a lifelong perspective. So from a campaigner perspective, there's a lot of overlap in terms of just strategy of how you want to plan your campaign. But on the execution level, it is different because when you are acquiring a Kickstarter backer, they're just in it for the short term to get a product in return in 3 to 6 months, right? So they're focused much more on the product side versus the long-term vision side. They're investing in the campaign because like the geo-orbital wheel, like this does not exist on the market today, right? Like this is innovative, it's new. I can't buy this anywhere else right now. I'm getting this product, and in 3 to 6 months, I want my product, right? Versus when you do a campaign like every day, people are buying in much more on the founders. People are buying in much more on the projection of the company, where they're going, and on the ethos of the vision and the problems that they're solving as well, versus, the product does come into play a lot. I mean, obviously that's the initial appeal, but there's multiple other layers that the backers and investors on a Wefunder campaign, an equity crowdfunding campaign, invest in. So from a campaigner, there is strategic overlap between a perks-based and an equity campaign, but the audience is different, and you have to know how to tackle that audience differently, and where they live is a bit different as well. The Kickstarter backers are on Product Hunt and on Reddit and are on like early adopter platforms like the Touch of Modern. Like that's where they're usually living and looking for cool, innovative new products that they can't buy on Amazon. And on the equity crowdfunding side, it's the Angels and Entrepreneurs Network with Neil Patel. It's the Raging Bull people. It's the King's Crowd people that are reading up more on equity deals. So different profile, but how you manage them once they're in the ecosystem is a lot of overlap between the two.
That's a really good way of looking at it, I think. Okay, last couple of questions. So, firstly, you've already given so many great ideas here, but one piece of advice for a founder who's running a regulation crowdfunding campaign, and then one piece of advice more broadly for a founder who's starting a startup.
Great. One piece of advice for someone leveraging scaling or launching a Reg CF or a Reg A campaign. This is in my opinion, you have to be hungry. right? You can't come in here and be like, you know what, I'm going to devote 12 to 3, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to my campaign and, go do other things. And, no, like this has to be a focus of yours. You have to get creative. I mean, there's a lot of in your local city, entrepreneurial meetup groups that you can reach out to, Google groups, Facebook groups, reach out to your economic development community, alumni networks, friends and family. I mean, there's so many different things you have to do as an equity crowdfunding campaigner that if you ever feel like the job is done before the campaign is over, you're off a lot.
When you talk about that and you're kind of giving examples there of like creative examples, and obviously a huge value add that you bring is you've seen hundreds of campaigns now, and
right.
so same with us as well. We've seen hundreds of campaigns. We have hundreds of these examples that we can rattle up. Economic development community, like, university alumni, newsletters, accelerators you've been through, communities of meetup groups, etc. Like, so we can kind of, both of us, help with like, these creative ideas. But I think it's cool to hear you say it in those terms, because I think like there's this Y Combinator. I think Paul Graham maybe had this definition of a founder as like the opposite of hapless, right?
Right.
Which is like someone that is just like infinitely resourceful, infinitely creative. Whenever they're coming up against a door being slammed in their face, they're trying to find an alternative avenue. And I think you're almost like kind of validating that with like, when you're raising, you just got to keep coming up with new ideas, keep being hungry, and keep like being creative. And that kind of is cool, because I think it's like, the company, the founders that are going to succeed here in equity crowdfunding and run a successful campaign, and especially if you're looking at raising $1 million plus, they're probably going to be the founders that are, the opposite of hapless. And that probably means that they're going to be more successful in running the company. So there's, going back to one of those first questions I asked on like, does this make it too easy? It's almost like, well, no, this is like the proving ground of like running a successful equity crowdfunding campaign is kind of a nice hurdle to overcome. And if you can overcome that, then that's probably a good sign that you're going to, be a successful founder and build a successful business.
Right. Two thoughts. Equity crowdfunding does not make fundraising easy. Equity crowdfunding makes fundraising global and accessible. Big difference between the two. Right?
I'm just going to push back a little maybe on a couple of things you said. Firstly, generally speaking, I would agree, right? You want to kind of dedicate time to this, focus this. Most companies are going to need to do that. As with any fundraising, like it takes time and effort to raise $1 million.
Right.
If you have a huge audience, I think there are some companies. Meow Wolf raised $1 million in 2 days on Wefunder. Subverse raised $1 million in a day. Lost Spirits raised $1 million in a few days. Modern Times, etc. There's some companies with a huge audience where actually they can just launch a campaign, push a button, and raise $1 million from 1,000 people in a week. Very 100%. Easy. So that's the other piece. And then I cannot remember the other thing I was going to say. I interrupted you.
Yeah. So great point, right? If you're an established venture with a decent sized community, one of the biggest benefits of an equity crowdfunding campaign is exactly that, giving the ability for your existing community to participate economically in your fundraise, which makes the process fast, streamlined, and frictionless, which is the example that you just gave. Which was
that was the other point I was going to make as well, which is that you're talking about the process. It's not making it easy. You said I think it makes it global and accessible.
That's correct.
I would say my pushback there would be I think we make it easier. I talk about 3 ways generally that we make it easier for startups to raise capital. The first is they can raise from unaccredited as well as accredited. So whatever you could raise from accredited investors, you can still bring that in. You can now just also raise from unaccredited. The second is you can publicly promote the offering. So now you can like more easily kind of get the word out. And then the third is we put you in front of Wefunder's investor base. Typically, they're accounting for half of the raise. So in those 3 ways, I would say we make it easier for startups to raise capital.
Agreed.
I would agree that it's not easy, except in those exceptional cases of companies with huge audience that we just touched on. But maybe you're saying the same thing there.
That's exactly what I'm saying, because there's a few different lines we have to be careful of. One is entrepreneurs that think they can just go on Wefunder and launch a campaign and raise $1 million because that's what equity crowdfunding is. That's not how it works, right?
Yeah,
but to your point, it is definitely easier because of the multiple layers of accredited and unaccredited investors you can reach out to, how seamless your platform makes it to file the Form C and do the audited financials and like to just offload that, right, and just focus on the community side, I think is a big, big plus. So you definitely do a lot of the legwork and make it easier, which I do agree. And I think to distill this down to a campaigner that wants to do a fundraise, and the one piece of advice I can give them is, even if you have a live campaign or thinking of doing a live campaign, let's say you're doing one for 60 to 90 days, I would do this thought experiment. I would sit down and look at a calendar, a monthly calendar. What is the start date of the campaign? What is the end date of the campaign? Mm-hmm. Week by week is fine, but I have high expectations for founders that we work with. And as a founder myself, I can speak to that. Day by day would probably be more ideal, where you're like, okay, Monday, day one of the campaign, email goes out to friends and family. I reach out to this group and this group. Tuesday, I do this. Wednesday, I do this. And like, try your hardest to fill those 60 to 90 days, at least week by week or every other day, if not daily, because the campaign that you are running is, how do you drive the most amount of qualified digital visitors to your Wefunder campaign page? Because a portion of them, based on a conversion rate, will convert as investors. So the game really becomes that equation. How do I send more qualified eyeballs to my Wefunder campaign page? And the longer you can prep that calendar and the better you can do a job at managing that, I think the more successful your raise will be.
What's that phrase? You get out what you put in.
That's exactly right.
So love that. It's a great piece of advice. And then lastly, a piece of advice for a founder more generally on starting a company.
And this is not meant to be facetious in any way. I genuinely mean this. Launch an equity crowdfunding campamping, right? I firmly believe.
Once again, man, back on the BD team for Wefunder. I love it.
I drink the Kool-Aid.
And when you do, definitely use the Arora project as your marketing agency.
Thank you. Because, like you said, there's two profiles of high growth startups, one that have communities and traction built around it. For you guys, like, this is a no-brainer, right? If you have active users, a good amount of eyeballs coming to your platform, launch a Wefunder campaign page, raise your $1,070,000, maybe do a potential round after that, and like go enjoy that capital for growth. And and that's sort of one portfolio of companies. And the other portfolio of companies,
I'll send you the check in the mail, okay?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And then the other portfolio of companies is the one like Every Day, right? Amazing founders, great product, who pushed really hard, hustled really hard, worked with us, and we raised them, a sizable round of funding. So I personally think the democratization and decentralization of fundraising, and then the brand advocate, the brand ambassador vibe that you get from your investors, and the community vibe, I think is a great way of going, because one of the biggest things founders need is capital. I mean, if you ask founders, what is your number one focal point, right? It's either like the product that you're creating, and the only thing that ever supersedes the product that you're making is the money required to keep the engine going, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a community, launch a Wefunder campaign. And if you don't have that big of a community, but an amazing product and think you have what it takes, launch a Wefunder campaign. That would be my advice. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. We've been talking about marketing the crowdfunding campaign. Just when you were talking about building a community of customers and champions and ambassadors, I'm working on a blog post right now from a company called Neurohacker that's now run, I think, 4 separate campaigns with Wefunder, and they sell online, and they basically gave me, the CPG company sell exclusively online, so they have very rich sales data, and I was able to map in an anonymized way their sales data to the Wefunder investor data, and I'm seeing some very exciting data points that, on one hand, if someone is not a previous Neurohacker customer, then they invest in the Wefunder campaign, then they go on to spend money with Neurohacker as a customer, and that customer spend month over month has been increasing over the years they've been working with us. And then on the other hand, the second data point is that people that were existing Neurohacker customers, when they invest, their churn rate goes down, or their monthly spend is much higher than a customer with a similar monthly spend before the Wefunder campaign who then didn't invest. So in both those ways, if you're a consumer-facing business, I'm going to be publishing this blog post soon, but I think you've got to really seriously consider raising capital from the crowd, either instead of or potentially as well as more conventional investors. I mean, obviously, like, we're definitely not anti, angels and VCs. Like, add a ton of value, like, ton of credibility, like, definitely want to do that as well. But for me, yeah, as you were saying, like, if you can recruit an army of investors who are customers and brand ambassadors and champions, that can do very, very good things for a consumer-facing business. Okay, last question, Krishan. If people, you've awesome job, so many great insights on this call. Thanks so much for sharing. I was worried that you might be, disclosing the secret sauce recipe, but I think the opposite has probably happened, where any fan is considering running a Reg CF campaign, like, oh my goodness, that guy's really smart. I need to work with the Aurora project. So if they want to do that, where do they find you?
Great. Our website is auroraproject.co, ARORA project.co. We have an equity crowdfunding application form right there, because we get a high volume of leads coming in sort of every single week, and we vet them out. And just fill it out right there. And or you can directly, if you're listening to this, let me put out, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you're interested in launching a campaign, you can email me directly. My email is k@auroraproject.co. If you email me directly and reference this podcast, I will personally get on a phone call with you and evaluate your crowdfunding your prospects.
Love it. And I would say, we'll put it in the show notes, because that's what professional podcast hosts say. It's like, oh, put it in the show notes. I actually don't know what show notes are or how to do that. But I'll say it. We'll put it in the show notes. Maybe we'll put it in the show notes. If you can find the show notes, whatever show notes are, it might be in there. You probably know that, so you can show me how to put it in the show notes. But yeah, man, really enjoyed the conversation, and we'll be in touch soon.
Appreciate it, my brother. Take care.